What's fascinating here is that the presentation identifies this exact behavioral pattern as a massive academic liability.
Oh, for sure.
This chaotic, multi-prompt approach inevitably results in students hastily scribbling vague declarations at the end of their papers. They write something unhelpful like, I used AI to help structure my thoughts.
Which means nothing.
Right. So instead of the technology acting as a robust academic support system, it's mutated into this tremendous burden of compliance.
Yeah, the student ends up spending hours stressing over acceptable use policies, trying to cover their tracks, or reverse engineer documentation for a profoundly messy process. It generates high anxiety while offering very unclear intellectual contributions to the actual work.
Which brings us to the proposed fix from GoldBerry. The core of their approach relies on a radical shift in the user workflow.
This is the GoldBerry promise, right?
Exactly. They suggest taking all of those dozens of shallow, chaotic, late-night AI interactions and replacing them entirely with a single, comprehensive, scoped interaction.
Okay, but I have to push back on this concept a little bit. The entire appeal of a chatbot is that it's conversational. You bounce ideas off of it. How does restricting a student to doing less, limiting them to just one interaction instead of 20, actually produce a better, more defensible academic paper? It sounds pretty counterintuitive.
It does sound counterintuitive, I'll give you that. But only if you view AI as merely a conversational search engine. We've been conditioned to believe that rapid-fire iterative prompting equals more assistance. But consider the architectural limitations of how large language models actually process information. Those 20 rapid-fire prompts are almost always shallow. They lack global context. Every time you ask a quick question, the AI is only looking at a tiny sliver of your intent.
Oh, I see. So it's missing the forest for the trees.
Precisely. If we use an architectural analogy, the current method is like calling a master architect every 10 minutes with a random disjointed idea, like, add a window here, now move the door, oh, make the roof flat.
You'd end up with a very strange, structurally unsound house.
Exactly, because the architect never saw the full picture. The single scoped interaction is the equivalent of handing that architect a highly organized, comprehensive portfolio containing your land survey, your budget, and your complete list of needs all at once.
Oh, that makes sense.
When you provide the AI with the full scope of your drafts or sources in one massive context window, it can generate a comprehensive contextual output that identifies structural flaws, rather than just giving you quick, superficial answers.
That makes the mechanics much clearer. If the system has the entire document in its context window simultaneously, it can map the relationships between all the paragraphs instead of just rewriting a single sentence in a vacuum.
Yeah, and the presentation actually provides a stark side-by-side comparison of the old workflow versus this new scoped model on page 7. It highlights how this structured framework replaces manual, anxiety-ridden workflows with systematic analysis.
Let's talk about source analysis for a second, because in the traditional workflow, a student might spend hours manually hunting for gaps in a dense 50-page academic text.
Or maybe using a chatbot to summarize random paragraphs when they get too tired.
Right, which is inefficient and highly prone to human error. But with a single scoped interaction, the tool uses a structured framework to instantly identify absences in the text.
Yeah, and the document also highlights draft review as a major pain point. Ordinarily, a student writes a draft, runs it through a basic grammar checker, and submits it, completely blind to the massive structural flaws in their overarching argument.
But this scoped interaction introduces a process they call epistemic checking to catch framing issues. And I want to linger on this because it feels like the most significant technical concept in the entire presentation.
It really is.
I mean, epistemology isn't a word you hear much outside of Philosophy 101. How does a machine perform an epistemic check?
Well, to understand the mechanics of it, we have to look at what epistemology actually is. It is the study of knowledge, specifically how we know what we know and what justifies our beliefs.
Okay.
So an epistemic check by an AI is not looking at syntax or grammar. It's analyzing the foundational assumptions of the student's argument.
So it goes much deeper.
Much deeper. Mechanically, the AI maps the semantic structure of the student's draft against its massive training corpus of historical and theoretical frameworks. It basically asks, are the foundational assumptions here logically sound? What pre-existing knowledge is the author taking for granted as universal truth when it's actually heavily debated?
Wow, so it's a much higher order critique. Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The presentation lifts the hood and shows us how this higher order critique plays out in practice across 4 specific use cases. Let's walk through how a student would actually apply this.
Sure, let's look at the first use case, reviewing a single source. A student uploads a journal article or a complex policy document.
But instead of just summarizing the text, which is what chatbots are famous for, this tool actively looks for flattened arguments or things the original author treats as self-evident assumptions.
Which fundamentally shifts the AI from being a simple summarization engine to a critical analytical engine. By mapping the text against broader academic data, it can flag if, say, a medical study draws a sweeping conclusion while entirely ignoring a specific demographic variable.
Which leads right into the second use case,
Yeah.
auditing a literature review. You upload your entire compiled list of sources, and the tool evaluates which traditions, populations, histories, or cultural perspectives are completely missing from your research.
It's powerful.
I find this fascinating, but also potentially jarring for a student. Imagine spending weeks researching urban development, feeling incredibly confident, and then a machine instantly points out that your entire literature review completely ignores the perspective of displaced communities.
It forces a broadening of the academic lens, which is incredibly valuable, but I agree it could be psychologically challenging for the student. We all suffer from unconscious bias in our research, right?
Yeah, we naturally gravitate toward familiar perspectives and cite what we already know.
Exactly. Having an impartial system explicitly surface those missing historical contexts forces the student to confront the limits of their own worldview before the professor ever sees the paper.
Then the third use case brings us back to that epistemic checking. This is where the student challenges their own draft. They test their thesis section before submission, and the AI actively searches for framing gaps, instances of overclaiming, or culturally narrow assumptions.
And finally, the fourth use case is comparing sources through multiple lenses. You can input a government policy document, a mainstream news article, and a peer-reviewed research paper, and the system will surface the historical, cultural, or evidential absences across all of them simultaneously.
That's incredible. And when you look closely at the mechanics of those four applications, you really understand why the single-scoped interaction is so vital. This is absolutely not about the AI generating text or doing the thinking for the student.
No, not at all. By forcing an epistemic check on a thesis gap, or by highlighting that a student's literature review relies solely on Western scholars from a specific decade, the AI is acting as a rigorous academic sparring partner.
A sparring partner, I like that.
It's systematically pointing out the weak spots in the student's intellectual armor, so the student has to do the hard work of fixing them. It operates as a critical thinking multiplier, not a shortcut.
That distinction totally changes the dynamic of compliance, which brings us to the final hurdle. Even if the AI is acting as a sparring partner, the student still has to declare to their university.
Right, which goes back to those mandates.
And the presentation contrasts the vague declarations of the current era with the precise documentation enabled by this new workflow. Under the old burden of compliance, a student uses a chatbot 15 times to get unstuck, panics, and writes, "I used AI to improve my essay."
Which is a massive red flag for any academic institution. That kind of vague declaration invites intense doubt. The professor reading that statement has no idea where the student's mind ends and the machine begins.
They have to wonder if the AI wrote a single transition paragraph, or if it structured the entire argument, or if it just acted as an advanced spell checker.
Exactly. The opacity of the process is what creates the hostility.
But because this new system relies on that one highly structured interaction, the resulting documentation is mathematically precise. The presentation offers this example of a modern declaration. I used GoldBerry to review a source, identify missing perspectives, historical context, and evidential limits.
That provides clear, defensible boundaries of the AI's involvement.
However, for this to be accepted by institutions like Cambridge, the tool itself has to be inherently trustworthy. The document outlines 3 strict pillars that make this entire model function. And I want to look closely at the first one, which is no ghostwriting.
Right?
The presentation claims the tool explicitly refuses to write assessed work. Honestly, will students actually use a tool that refuses to do the heavy lifting of writing the essay for them?
That is the pivotal question regarding user adoption. If a student is merely looking for a quick way out, they will likely seek out unrestricted tools. But the presentation argues that the fear of the new university mandates will drive adoption of compliant tools.
Because students are terrified of being expelled for academic misconduct.
Exactly. The no ghostwriting pillar is enforced at the system level. The AI is literally programmed to refuse generative writing prompts for assessed work. It forces the student to be the sole author of the text.
Which flows directly into the second pillar, no hiding. The documentation isn't something the student has to remember to write down later. It's built directly into the system's output.
Every single use is transparent. It creates the exact kind of clear audit trail that these strict universities are demanding.
And the third pillar, no substitution, ties the philosophy together. The system is designed to support authentic student authorship rather than replace it.
It enhances the student's cognitive process by challenging their assumptions rather than substituting their unique voice with synthetically generated text. If a tool violates any of these three pillars, if it ghostwrites, if it hides its tracks, or if it substitutes human thought, the entire model of transparent compliance collapses.
I can see why this structured approach is a massive relief for students who want to use AI without feeling like criminals. But looking at the other side of the lecture hall, how does this actually impact the professors?
That's a great question.
Right now, the academic environment is saturated with AI paranoia. Professors are constantly running student papers through AI detection software, and we know those detectors have notoriously terrible false positive rates.
Oh, the false positives are a nightmare.
Students are being falsely accused of cheating because they use Grammarly or just because they write in a very formulaic way. The atmosphere is incredibly hostile. Does a transparent tool like this actually de-escalate that paranoia?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it absolutely has the potential to de-escalate the tension because it addresses the root cause of the paranoia, which is opacity. Professors are not inherently afraid of technology.
They aren't.
No, they're afraid of evaluating a machine's work under the guise of evaluating a student's intellect. By shifting to a declared research instrument with a built-in audit trail, lecturers receive a legible, transparent process to review.
Oh, so they can actually see the work.
They're no longer just grading a polished final paper. They are granted a window into the student's research methodology. They can see the critical thinking occurring in real time as the student navigates the AI's feedback.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
The current arms race of students trying to hide their AI use and professors using deeply flawed software to detect it is a complete dead end. It just creates a culture of mutual distrust.
Yeah.
The most profound insight from this entire deep dive seems to be that the winning AI tool in the academic space isn't going to be the one that generates the most human-sounding text or hides its digital fingerprints the best.
No, the winning tool is the one that forces students to use AI transparently, critically, and defensively.
For the institutions themselves, adopting this framework provides a usable, scalable model of academic integrity for the 21st century. It moves the conversation away from punitive bans and towards structured integration.
It normalizes the technology, moving it out of the shadows.
So what does this all mean? Synthesizing all of this, the presentation frames this platform as a declared research instrument. It aims to make student life easier and significantly clearer by taking all the friction and anxiety out of compliance, integrating it directly into an authentic workflow. The underlying message here is that the future of student research is not about avoiding artificial intelligence. It's about establishing a highly structured, transparent partnership with it. It's about a student being able to proudly hand in a paper and say, yes, I used an advanced analytical engine to audit my intellectual blind spots, and my final argument is infinitely more robust because of it.
This raises an important question for us to consider as we move forward. If platforms like this succeed, they will shift AI from being a secret, illicit ghostwriter into a mandatory, fully declared instrument. We already accept a mathematician declaring the use of a complex graphing calculator or a biologist relying on an electron microscope to see what the human eye cannot.
That's very true.
If an AI system becomes the standard instrument used to surface all of our historical, cultural, and evidential blind spots, how might this alter the very definition of what it means to be an original thinker in academia? If the machine reliably gathers the missing information and maps the epistemology, perhaps original human thought becomes less about the act of gathering data and entirely about the unique, highly subjective human judgment calls we make with the information the machine provides.
That completely reframes the value of human intuition in research. And it brings us right back to that exam room scenario we started with. Imagine walking into that high-stakes environment, but instead of hyperventilating about a secret cheat sheet hidden in your pocket, you simply walk in and calmly place your powerful approved tools right on the desk for the proctor and everyone else to see. You aren't hiding anything anymore. You understand your tools, you know their limits, and you are just ready to do the actual work.